Hey guys, here we are looking at the lower orchard sweethearts again that I had a previous video talking about the Sylleptic branching on. I wanted to talk briefly about what I'm seeing for fruit spur development on these shoots. So these were pruned back hard. They grew uprights. Some uprights produce Sylleptics, and the question is, are the Sylleptics of any value? And in the previous video, I think I provided evidence that the Sylleptics are of less value, if any. So this is a very typical shoot. It's now entering its... so this shoot grew in 2015 as a shoot, a first-year shoot. Then we had a second-year shoot in 2016, so we're entering a third-year shoot in 2017. And this is an upright growing right here that's growing just like we expect for a third-year shoot. You can see all of the fruiting spurs along it here, and that is just fruited up. And this would make a beautiful UFO upright. So let's look at the neighbor. And this shoot was less vigorous, and see how it didn't produce any Sylleptics because it didn't have as much vigor. If we associate Sylleptics with vigor, the shoot produced mostly spurs, which is a good thing. So now if we look at the shoot next to it here that grew, you can see the shoot growing up here. It's been pruned, and then there's a Sylleptic growing off of that shoot. So if we look at this shoot, you can see compared to this one that's less vigorous, this shoot here has less fruiting spurs along it, which is really interesting. And the fruiting spurs on this shoot have less buds per spur than the less vigorous shoot. So the more vigorous shoot that we're looking at here has less spurs. And in fact, if we look at the distal end, there are more spurs. But as we go down, we actually start to see these individual I don't know what we call them. They aren't really spurs, but we start to see just these individual points coming out that have a single bud a lot more often on this shoot. And if we look here at the Sylleptic next to it, you can see that we have these sort of funky Sylleptic type of spurs or individual bud points. We see it here on the shoot in these, like right here. And then we also see it on the proximal end of the Sylleptic. But as we move out on the Sylleptic here, boy, we start to see some fruiting spurs along here, which is really interesting to me. And by the time we get to the end of the Sylleptic, where we have basal buds from shoots last year, in the end, we actually have more of a normal looking spurt type of spur than we do when we go down at the base of the Sylleptic, where we have these weird points that I'm going to have to ask Dr. Lang what we actually call these little things, because they aren't spurs, but they're sort of behaving like them in a way. So the reason I wanted to show you this is I think it's really interesting that this amount of spurs is related to vigor. The less vigor, the more that the shoot spurs up. But that the Sylleptics are behaving at the distal end very similar to the really vigorous shoots that produce them. This vigorous shoot that produced the Sylleptic has more spurs at the distal end than the proximal end. And both the Sylleptic and the shoot are demonstrating these really funky little individual bud growing points. If we could turn those individual bud growing points into spurs, that would be great. But that's the million-dollar question is can we? So I wanted to show you this on video for our discussion as we think about the orchard of the future.